Hello and welcome to the official podcast of the International Physical Literacy Association. If you are a coach, a teacher, or a parent, this podcast is for you because it's hosted by me, Kurt Bowyer, but more to the point, we interview people and share conversations from across the globe to bring you stories of how physical literacy is shaping lives. And today, I am welcoming Christian Olsen, the impact manager at the International Paralympic Committee. And with a background in political science and years of experience in policy analysis and research, Christian now focuses on measuring how sport transforms lives around the world. His work intersects data, inclusion, and human impact, making him the perfect guest to explore how physical literacy and inclusive sport can shape a better, more active society. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Kirk. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we're super excited to have you. So, as always in this podcast, Christian, we start by asking our guests in under 30 seconds, if you can, what's your definition of physical literacy?
So I suppose my definition isn't unique in any way, but I'm highly inspired by Margaret Whitehead, of course. And I think for me, physical literacy is the innate um, um, want to be physical active, right? So it's the motility that we have, right? The urge or the need to be physical active, and not only as because of the joy of it, but also because it's something that you cannot not do.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. So, what I didn't mention in the introduction there, which I probably should have, is that Christian is also a Paralympian in athletics, and which is interesting because can we start with that? Can we start with your story because you are a Paralympian,
hmm
which is actually very close to my heart. What was it like? What was it? What was your relationship with physical literacy? What's your physical literacy journey as you were growing up as a kid?
Mm. So I think it's important for me just to explicate that my disability is rather small, right? So it's not a severe disability. So I grew up taking part in mainstream sport activities, maybe always a bit less eloquent than some of the other team mates that I had. But I was able to take part in the local football club, or in Denmark, the handball club as well.
Right.
Um, so I always played a lot of sports, and I've always been physical active. And then actually, it was my story is not anything special, but it's often the case that para athletes have a rather rapid or a comet career, right? So when you are identified and classified as a para athlete, you are often a bit older than the usual talent in mainstream sport. So in my case, I was only identified and classified when I was 24 years old, right? So it was only when I moved from my small town on the in the rural area of Denmark to the
Cool.
capital of Copenhagen, where I then joined a athletics club, and then I was spotted by the para athletics coach, and then he, yeah, slowly enrolled me into the para athletics team, and then I got my international classification, and then the same year as I was classified, I competed at the games in Tokyo.
So let's go back even further then. What? Because you seem like you were very sporty, and where did that come from? Was that your parents? Was that what inspired you to be active? What
Mm.
inspired you to love to be active?
Yeah. So I think both my parents were active during my childhood, and then I have a older brother without a disability, and he was active. And then I guess just the school that we went to was rather focused on every student or every pupil being active during the breaks throughout the day. And then in Denmark, you would often, after school, have different extracurricular activities. And I guess what made me do the sport was that all of my friends did the sports, right? So I think those, like the peer, not the peer pressure, but the peer influence that I felt was just, and this is a positive one, I guess, right, to be physical active. But I guess my friends and my peers, they inspired me to be physical active as well.
Do you mind me asking what the disability you have
Mm.
is?
Yeah, so I have a palsy in my right arm.
Okay.
Usually when you talk about palsies, it's cerebral palsies,
Mm.
right? But mine is peripheral, so it actually only sits within my right arm. But it's a disability that you acquire during birth. So in the moment uh, to you are stuck in the birth situation, and then the doctors will pull your arm, and then it rips apart quite a lot of the nerves, and it dislocates the joint, and then that creates a kind of palsy. And more specifically, it's called a Duchenne Erb's palsy.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that. And that leads me on to my next question. Actually, in were there any barriers in terms of physical literacy? Opportunities to be active based on the disability that you had when you were younger.
Hmm. I think it's talking about disabilities. I think it's always worth mentioning, but also to consider that it's a very wide spectrum, right? So,
Right.
at, and I think it's sometimes it's useful to differentiate between impairment and disability, because that allows you to to think about the different uh, the difference in the two, and then when you are limited in your functionality. So my impairment is rather stable, right? And then in some instances, it creates a disability for me in combination with the surrounding environment, but also the task that I have to do. And in my case, I deliberately chose sports where it wouldn't be that big of a challenge for me to participate, right? So if I swimming would have been a much more would have been a bigger challenge for me, because then you would be it would be needed to be able to use both of your arms more or less in the same way, right? But for instance, playing football, it's more or less your legs and your
Mm.
aerobic system that does the work, right? And then also of course, the understanding of the game and etc. Um,
You mentioned
but
handball as well. Like
yeah,
you
yeah,
played
yeah,
handball. Yeah.
yeah.
So how was that?
So I didn't. It was only like in my early childhood that I did play handball,
Yeah.
because it did definitely challenge me, because I were able to catch the ball, and then of course when you throw, it's only one arm, right? But what I am not that good at is I'm not that strong in my upper body, because I can't do strength training or can't move in the same way. So when it was needed for the handball um, sport and for the game to be a bit more, um, so to say, technical, I didn't continue playing handball, um, and I suppose it's also related to the joy of the sport, right?
Mm.
As soon as you face constant challenges, you have to decide whether it's feasible to continue, or you might want to explore different sports. And then during high school, I got into running, and that is, of course, more or less driven by my legs. You are propelled forward by the
Yeah.
movement that your legs do, and then a little less of the upper body, even though it also generates movement, right? The upper body rotation.
So can you was there a because it sounds like you were there were different opportunities presented to you after, handball was not giving you the joy of physical activity. Is there can you remember one particular person or one coach or whatever that inspired you to athletics, for example, and what they
Mm,
might have done to encourage you to take up that sport?
mm. Yeah, I think it was I do remember a specific teacher who encouraged me because I guess he spotted a maybe not a talent, I wouldn't say that, but just a potential
Yeah,
to to do physical movement without being limited or restricted in my movement.
yeah,
And then I guess it resonated with me because I didn't experience any barriers while running. So it's not, and it is often something that I find interesting that when I see a video of myself running, especially when I run fast and compete at the games, uh, I it looks, for me it looks like it's a different person running, right? Because when I run, I don't experience the lack of movement. I move in a different way
right.
due to my palsy, right? And but I don't notice when I run,
Okay.
and I think that's what I mean by the joy, right? I think that goes for a lot of people with a disability. Being in the sport, like it liberates you from a constant, for some people at least constant, and for others less constant, but at times quite tangible experience of being limited or restricted, right? So in the
Yeah,
sport, you tend to forget yourself, right? Because it's the it feels natural to move in the specific sport that you choose, right? And then not experience the barriers, or at least when you do the para sport, right, you only compete against those who have the same starting point as yourself. And
yes,
I think that's something that stays with me, right? The first experience of competing against someone at the same level as yourself, that's quite special when you in your entire life has been challenged or maybe just a step behind everyone, because or due to your impairment.
yeah, and that I think that really is because you're clearly very determined. Um, I think what I'm getting from you is that you were clearly very determined to find a sport or a physical activity that brought you joy.
Mm,
My concern is that those with an impairment, what if they're not that determined? Because they are, it's perhaps tougher in this world to find that joy in, we've already heard your story, for example, in handball, where you didn't find joy in that because with the impairment was too much, maybe to play, or to compete, or maybe am I right in saying that? Or
I think you're right, yeah, but I think that it's important to remember that when I played handball, it was against mainstream or people without disabilities, right? So I think, and that was due to me living in the countryside, right? So I think it would have been a different experience if I were playing handball, para handball, which is a sport I don't believe exists actually. But but if I think that's the difference, right? Because
yeah,
I don't think it's any different from people living without disabilities to us with disabilities. It goes for everyone. Some are more into movement and physical activity than others, but I believe that there's the distribution of talent and potential is the same for both groups. It doesn't it is no different for the group of people with disabilities. Some are more into sports than others, and I think there's a potential. And then of course, you're right that if you do mainstream sport or just attend your local fitness center, right? Then you will experience different challenges and barriers,
Yeah.
and that is something you have to deal with yourself, uh, simultaneously with um, more attention on a more systemic level is being raised.
And I think that's my point, is there are less opportunities.
Mm.
There are less opportunities. And I think that is a worry. So my next question is, how can teachers and coaches help children with impairment,
Hmm.
disabilities, develop confidence and joy in movement together?
Hmm.
How can they do that?
I think it's really up to the in the particular situation to start by providing basic skills and also basic challenges or tasks, right? So you have to start at the level where it's possible to find um, joy, but also to actually succeed in the task that you are given or in the exercises that you do, right? And I think that's you could do a lot of different adaptations to the sport or to the activity that then meet the level of ability that the person with a disability has, and then you can build more difficult elements into that play or that game or that exercise. But I think it's really important just to for teachers and coaches just to be aware that there's no like you can't really do anything wrong, I would say, right? It's not that people are more fragile than others,
Mm.
right? So of course there's some movements that is difficult or some movements you should avoid, but the person with a disability knows which movements are good or doesn't feel right, and then they will avoid or tell you that. So I think it's just it's it it's just something that you have to step by step and learning by doing with the specific individual that you are coaching or teaching.
As because you are the impact manager for the International Paralympic
Hmm.
Committee, um, what what does impact mean in your role?
In my role, or as how we define it in the
Yeah,
IPC.
I suppose both.
Okay. So the way we define impact is the effect. It's both the process of doing sport and being physical active activities, and then the effect it has beyond the sports sector for the individual, for the community, and for society at large. So it's not a new thought of line that when you are physical active and you develop self independence, self confidence, and those besides the health benefits, of course, those effects they will slowly um, uh, trickle down into other areas of life, right? So it helps you build skills that you can apply in a educational or a employment arena, and also in more um, civic, in just in general civic participation in society. Um, so that's what we mean by impact, trying to demonstrate how the increased levels of physical activity has a benefit for the individual in the short term, but also for the community and the society in the long term as well.
That's really interesting. Are there any examples of countries or governments that are doing that really well?
I think there's a lot of good examples, and I could, yeah, give you different stories or anecdotes of how people are doing well due to the fact that they took up physical activities in sport. But what I would like to say is also that in most countries we have quite some difficulties in actually on a more um, quantifiable scale identifying the effects of people being physical active and the effects of that into more societal domains. And that is because the data availability isn't there. So that's something we are trying to work on, how to establish basic benchmarks and baselines for then how to best assess the progress in societies as well.
Okay, so what is yeah, what are the goals within your role? What are you hoping to achieve in, you know, uh, in a set period? Is it work in cycles like the Olympic cycles in terms of
Mm.
your goals, or how does that work? What are the goals?
So we just launched earlier this year. We launched the impact strategy of the IPC, and
Yeah,
in the impact strategy, we identify 8 impact objectives that we try to influence. And those 8 objectives are not something that we will achieve within the next coming 4 years. So it's really long term goals, right? So it's about um, it's um, closing the employment gap, for instance, between people with and without disabilities, raising the educational levels, the reducing the gap of health inequality, um, and visibility in society in general. So it's those. It's really
mm,
long term goals. So what we, in a more short term, are looking at is to establish partnerships and doing global advocacy, and then also just establishing a more sound empirical evidence base.
what inspires you most in your work with the Paralympic Committee?
I would like to give you 2 different answers. I suppose so. One of
Yeah,
them being competing myself at the games, right? That's quite spectacular. Being a athlete at the games, and one of the things that I remember besides my own event is also just being in the athlete village,
yeah,
the area where all the athletes live and sleep and eat, right? Because you are exposed to a incredible vast diversity of people with different impairments, and every single one of them has found their way to move and be physical active. And I think that is really really inspiring, especially because when you outside the athlete village, in every society, in every corner of the world, you won't find people being that active or that visible. And I think that's something for me that is just that is setting the the level of ambition, or that's the ideal situation, right? That everyone has the opportunity and has also seized the opportunity to be physical active and then excelling in the sport that they chose.
mm,
And this is not to say that everyone should be a Paralympian who has a disability, right? Just in the same way that everyone without a disability
yeah,
cannot and should not be a Olympian.
yes,
It's a selected few who can achieve that uh, level of excellence in sport. Um, but I think it's just a really powerful example of what is achievable when we remove all unnecessary barriers, and then provide people with the uh, same and just starting point. And that's for me really inspiring, because if you could do that in sport, we can also do it in other areas of society as well, if
mm,
we as a society choose to invest and remove all of these barriers for people with disabilities. So I think that's what really inspires me. And then I'm a bit of a nerd, so I am also inspired by data and empirical evidence. But that's a different, I
yeah.
guess, that's a different beast. And I think most people are finding the uh, the Paralympic Games more inspiring as well.
I absolutely do. Yeah. You mentioned unnecessary barriers there. What do you think are the unnecessary barriers that can easily be removed
Mm.
when in terms of physical literacy?
In terms of physical literacy, I think um, I, I think it's of course there's all the tangible barriers, right? So it's the if you are using a wheelchair and you cannot access uh, a venue or a sport facility,
Right.
that's a barrier that has to be removed.
Yes.
But it's also if you have a amputation and you need a special um, prosthetic leg to run or jump, for instance, in athletics, right? Then you need that assistive equipment to be in place.
Yeah.
But then there's also the attitudinal barriers. So there's both the perceptions that people with disability holds for themselves, being I cannot do this, I'm not sport and me doesn't match up. We are not a I'm not supposed to do sport. And those misconceptions often stems from the way that teachers or professionals or caretakers or parents are talking or informed on what their children can and cannot do. So that's the I would say the in when one barrier is the internalized perceptions and attitudes, and then of course also when you go to a sport club that offers either mainstream activity
Mm.
or parasport activity, then you have to feel welcome. You have to have a sense of belonging, and that's the cultural aspects of it as well. So I think you you have to remove those in order to have the same um, equal access and equality, right? So if you do not remove those barriers, some specific individuals with disabilities in some cases can overcome them, but that is the rarity, right? That's not often the case, and it's not something that we should rely on. That individuals themselves overcome these barriers. It should be on a more systemic, in a more systemic way removed.
Because I was talking to Trevor, who's the vice chairman of the IPLA, and in his work he talks about he consults in planning in terms of housing developments in regards to physical literacy. So you know what the best things to including in a housing development, how to lay it out so people are more inspired to be physically active in their environment.
Hmm.
And just as I'm talking to you here, is that we didn't really mention within that call at all, within that podcast at all, those with impairments or disabilities. For example, there may be in my housing development, there's a playground, but is it
Hmm.
potential? You know, is it accessible? Is it inclusive for all? No. Um, there are, there are different things. There are different barriers that I can think of
Mm,
within my own housing development here that that are that are not inclusive in
mm,
terms of physical literacy and benefiting all. Um, how how can we get around that? How can we change all of those things? How can we
mm.
advise planners better for living spaces?
Yeah. I think the one of the obvious answers is that you want to apply a more participatory approach. So you just have to start asking those you want to see using the playground or the
Mm.
environment, right? So I think it's a starting point that when you do a assessment or when you do a study, involve those who are to use it, and that is also people with a disability or children with a disability. So have those have us included in a process of what is needed in a specific environment or context. So I think just include people in the process when you develop things, right? Because
Yeah.
um, it's really difficult, and it's also it is really difficult to know what other people need in order to be physical active. So I think that's the starting point. Involve people in a participatory way.
Can I now actually go on to parents? So if parents have a child with a impairment disability, um, and their child is not particularly as active as what they could be, and they haven't found joy in and in a particular activity, what or what's your advice for them?
Hmm. I think honestly, I think it's a rare case that children don't find joy in activity, physical activity, if it's at their level. So um, I think you
That's a
then.
really interesting question because I think I don't know. I think that I personally, I think there'll be a lot of people that disagree with me here, but I
Mm,
don't think some kids have found that joy in physical activity, which keeps them inactive.
mm, mm. And I guess you could be right, and it also depends on the age of the children, right? So, but on
Yeah,
the onset, I think we are prone to move, and we want to move. So I think it. Of course, you can unlearn that if you're
yeah,
not stimulated in the right way in your childhood. But I think if you have a child that is just not fond of moving and participating in sport, it might be a good idea to look for, if this child has a disability, to look for a um, a community of others who have the same uh, challenges, right? So go and find the nearest parasport club or adaptive physical activity offerings in your neighborhood. I think that could be one way of trying to instill some need or some want to be physical active. And I think I can, of course, I can relate to the unpleasant feeling of being different in a setting. So
yeah,
that is something that people with and without disabilities experience. But if you have a disability, you will find yourself more often in a situation where you could be understood as the odd one out, right? And that is, especially for children, something you have to deal with. And then it helps being in a community where others experience some of the same challenges and might look like you, right? So I think that is really, and I forgot to mention this when we talked about the unnecessary barriers, but what is really crucial is that you also have role models, right? So I think that's one of the really great things about the Paralympic Games.
mm,
It puts at the global stage people who move differently, who looks differently, and then have that visibility. And then the opportunity for children, small children, to look at someone on their television and see that they move just in the same way, or they look the same as that little child,
yeah.
and then I think that helps building an understanding of, okay, movement is for me as well, of course.
Yeah, role models like yourself, especially in Paralympics and the Olympics and in
Hmm.
all sport,
Yeah.
can really initiate you know, changes in behavior, changes in their activity levels. I think that's so strong, and that actually brings me on to my next question: is do you find that um, physical literacy, physical activity programs, for example, can, especially with the Paralympics and what you're doing at the Paralympic Committee, can it actually lead to changes in being a more inclusive society? Because we look at
Mm.
the Paralympics, we are always inspired by it. Can it then lead to other changes away from physical activity, away from physical literacy, that actually changes the way we are more inclusive as a society?
Mm. Yeah, so that's um, that's definitely something that the games does to
Yeah.
society. So the host country, especially, or the host territory, right? So you would find, and we call this the lasting legacy of the games, right? So the legacy being many things, but also the changes that the games either accelerate or initiate. And to give you an example, in Paris, in the lead up to the games last summer, the government and the city of Paris invested in the bus stations, but also in the bus fleet itself, right? To make all of the bus stops and the buses accessible for people using wheelchairs. So, and that is, of course, a structure that remains in place after the game and the event has ended.
Mm.
Um, Another thing they did was to make a assessment of how many sport clubs in France were accessible in general. And they found that 1% of the sport clubs were accessible, and then they created this program called Club Inclusif. And then that allowed for educational campaigns and awareness raising. And now the figure is up almost at 10%, meaning that clubs in France provide sporting opportunities for people with disabilities. In some contexts, it's parasport, and in others, it's but then it's allowing for people with disability to take part in mainstream offerings. So that's another example.
So
And then it, yeah,
1% of clubs are accessible pre-Olympic Games
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
is that in Paris or France? Did you say?
That was in France.
Okay,
Yeah,
1%, and then they've increased that to 10% post
yeah,
game,
yeah.
which is still an incredibly low number.
Mm,
Well, I mean, and that's just in a host country of the Olympic Games. I mean,
hmm
how how do we do better?
hmm Yeah, so I think there's it it's not an easy job, right?
No.
It demands policy changes and also firm requirements, I would say, as well. Like new legislation and then investments, because you will also. It's. I think you have to remember that it's not in most cases. I believe it's not by uh, bad intentions that these clubs aren't accessible, right? It's just because when you built this building 50 years ago, you didn't consider it to be accessible. And then the refurbishment of that building is rather expensive for a non-profit sports club, right? That has no elite level activities. So I think it's just worth remembering that these changes takes time and it takes investments, and I think that's what something we work on, and we try to help the sport community by putting pressure on a top-down level on governments to make some policy changes that makes it uh, more provides incentives for sport clubs to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So it's been an incredible and insightful um, talk, and I've really learned so much from you. And I wish we could go on, but we can't because you're running out of time. But if you could get every listener to take one action after this episode in regards to physical literacy, what would it be?
The next time you are in a sport environment, have a look around and see if you can spot a person with a disability. And then if you can't, try to identify some of the barriers that could be a reason for them not being there. Yeah.
That
I
is
think that.
absolutely fantastic advice. And as you were saying it, I was just thinking about my local tennis club. I was thinking about my athletics club, and I was thinking about all those things. And actually, there are no one that I know with a disability in those clubs.
Hmm.
So what can I do? What can I do now to encourage to encourage it to get? What can I do to get that better?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess you could join the the board or some of the
Yeah,
different groups that develops the offerings within that club that you are joining, being a member of, and then start asking questions if this club shouldn't be a disability inclusive club as well,
yeah,
because you'll probably with quite small adaptations be able to make the club more accessible, and then attract new members and then have some growth. So that's the that's of course the upside, right? But
mm,
I think that's one way, and then you could also, I guess, encourage, if you have someone in your proximity that has a disability, to ask them if they want to uh, to do tennis, play some tennis with
yeah,
you, and
yeah, yeah,
then maybe you shouldn't do if it's the first time, like with anyone else, don't do a fully fledged match the first time, but just
yeah,
start some basic movements and then see how that's going.
yeah. Just hit and rally or whatever, and
Hmm.
that's really opened up my mind actually to thinking that I haven't done enough. I haven't done enough in my own clubs that I like to go to ensure that they are inclusive. And I think that we can all do more. And you've definitely opened up my thoughts as to how I can do more. First of all, in my business, and second of all, in my own life, in my own clubs. And I think that's got to be where we all start. So
Mm.
that's it's been so good to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much, Christian.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. It's been really interesting talking to you, Kirk. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.